Part 12 of my paranormal experiences and supernatural weird incidences that have occurred. Now, this one, I'm going to take you to a farm in a place called Bethesda or College Grove, Tennessee. And the story is. Now, I wasn't the first of my cousins that had actually gotten off on this land. My oldest cousin actually was. But I was the second of the cousins that did. And at this particular time, it was my first night spending the night on this farm. And it was a big farm, and it was actually semi-landlocked because if it rained too much, it would storm, and there was a concrete bridge at the bottom and a big creek, and it connected to the Harpeth River. And so it was a tributary of the Harpeth River there that runs through Williamson County and Franklin, Tennessee, and down in that area, Brentwood and all that. And so when it rains a lot, it would flood out, and there was a big barn and corral that could hold up to 40 horses on the lower part of the land, and then you could go up to the top of the hill, and there was a farmhouse. It had an upstairs, downstairs, old farmhouse, and there was cattle because the land was actually owned by someone who ran a lot of cattle. And there was an old dairy, like it was a huge like milk silo and like dairy building that they had that had been closed down, and there was a bunch of old crop stored in there, and behind it there were big hay bales that would be stored, and there was also an old barn, and it was kind of decrepit and falling apart, which wasn't like the barn down at the bottom of the hill. There was also some distance back behind that, if you crossed the cow pasture, there was an old shed with like a wooden dirt floor, and there was a big pond, like all kind of like swampy pond, had that little green stuff, little floaty plants that on all across the surface of it. And there was another couple of ponds on the other side, and there was also an old cave. And there was this big trench on one side of the land when you were walking up towards where the dairy building was. And it was real deep. It was a real deep ravine, and you could look down into it as you were walking by. But anyway, we got all over those lands. And I have a lot of stories I could tell about those lands. But one of the things that stuck out about this place is near the house there was like a flower bush that had been planted, and there was a plaque in the ground, and it said that it was in memory of a baby, and evidently the baby had died. Well, all of us, because we seen that kind of memorial plaque there, had known that this was a memorial there on the edge of the yard, and you know, we'd go and check it out and everything, but we didn't really try to make too much of it. Well, my first night out there, I was sleeping in a room, and it was a guest room at the time, and this house went through 3 of my aunts. Belonged to one aunt, then she moved, and another aunt took over the lease, and then that aunt ended up getting a home that she had built, and another aunt that had been living with her took over until she finally moved out and bought her own house. She was there for several years, though. Anyway, I was in the guest room that night, and my cousin's room was upstairs. My aunt's room was on the other side of the house. And there was a big window, and you could look out, and there was one little light that there was just like a bluish light. And this is in the middle of nowhere out in Tennessee, out in the hills. And it's really dark out there. And I was laying there in the bed, and I was just kind of like trying to go to sleep, and I look out and I see the one blue light. It kind of freaks me out because I was like 12 years old at this time, maybe 11. And I was like, well, this blue light's kind of weird, but it will be okay. It's just a blue light. Don't worry about it. It's just the light out there in the driveway that my aunt has, just so she can look out and see if there was coyotes or anything in the yard or anything like that. And I kind of blew it off. And I laid there for a little while longer, and my mind's just racing and racing, and I am Like, I can't sleep. I can't sleep. And then I look out the window again, and out over, like, where the silo and the dairy thing is, I see what seems like light beams coming down, shooting down on top. And I stood up and I walked over to the window at this point, and I'm watching and I'm looking in the night sky. And, you know, I had been to Tennessee once before when I was 4 years old, which I vaguely remember. But this was my first experience the first summer I moved there after being raised in Oregon most of my life. And the lights were shining down, and it looked like as I was watching where these light beams were, it looked like there was like this silvery craft that kind of came over, and it was hovering probably about 20 feet above the dairy building, and it was disc-shaped and silvery, and I could see like three in the front, because it was circular on the end that I could see. And it looked like there were three lights, like yellowish lights. There goes the train. Excuse me for all that, y'all. So, the three lights were there on this silvery craft, and I just watch it, and it just sits there, and it hovers for a few minutes. And then I remember saying out loud under my breath, "Oh my God, I've just scared myself so much that, you know, I'm probably just kind of overthinking in here. I don't need to." And I went back over to the bed and laid down, and I covered my blankets up to my face. And I just remember that it was the eeriest experience. And I know that my cousins, different ones there, have had different experiences too, especially with like my brother and a couple of my cousins going into a cave on the property. And another one of my cousins says that she's seen what she thought were angels descending over the same thing, the same basic area from where her window was. And like I said, there were lots of different events that happened in that house. And I think that I didn't stay in that house nearly as much as my other cousins did. I stayed in it a lot. We spent a lot of summers up there, from the time I was 11 till I was about 15. And so it was several years that we were all up there together. And we were homeschooled a great deal of the time. And one of my aunt's husbands was incredibly abusive. I mean, really entirely abusive. So there was a lot of things that were happening in central to that place. And every time we would talk about seeing something weird, or we'd ask any questions about it, we were kind of dismissed or hushed or set aside and told to get out of their hair, or whatever the case may be. They didn't, want us to focus on any of that. They didn't want to answer a lot of questions about anything like that. We were basically Bible bashed. I can remember actually one time, which this is a totally different side story here, kind of going off on a tangent, but I don't mean to. Anyway, I can remember another time whenever, again, I was in that same house, but I was upstairs, and I looked out the window in the top part, and I was staying alone in that room too at that time. And I remembered seeing the lights again. And so, like I said, my other cousin, she said that she thought that they were angels for the longest time, that that's what she had been seeing. But now that we look back and we've learned a lot more and our eyes have been opened a little bit more, we now believe that they might have been aliens, to be honest with you. It also makes sense because there were a lot of cattle out there, and there were nights when we seen some really crazy things in the sky. And also, we seen the Halley's Comet from up there on that hill. So there were a lot of different events that happened, and that was a big deal. Our family did make a big deal out of us seeing the Halley's Comet. And we pretty much got around those lands a lot. So I know if I collected all of my cousins together and we all talked about it, there'd be a lot of stories to tell about that place. My cousin was actually saying the other day, she thought it'd be cool to go back up there again and see if we learned anything new. I'm not even sure if the house is still in the same order it used to be, because it has fallen apart last time I'd been up there. Anyways, it's an interesting place, and it's riddled with some mystery, and I thought I'd share that with y'all.